Okay. I'm going to start wide and move in close. That's my idea. Most novelists have thoughts about what the novel is, or rather what the novel is for them. It is a great and commodious prose form, and it's been used in many, many different ways, depending on an individual writer's aesthetic. I, as a girl, for example, was deeply marked by reading Dickens, Austen, and the Brontes. I know that you started writing young. What books marked you for life, and how did they affect your aesthetic ideas about the novel? And in parentheses, Hemingway and metaphor.
I suppose that in Ireland, poetry remained very important, and a figure such as W.B. Yeats really permeated almost the landscape. And certainly those early poems of his, poems like When You Were Old and Grey and Full of Sleep, and Nodding by the Fire, Take Down This Book and Slowly Read, of the soft look your eyes had once, and of their shadows deep. Just the way the rhymes work, the simplicity of that, but also the sonorousness, the sense of using language sonorously. That certainly by the age of, I promise I'm not making this up, but by the age of 12, I would have been reading those early poems of Yeats really carefully and sort of actually believing in them. And the way of evoking, it was an Irish landscape that wasn't my landscape because it was the west of Ireland. You know, the old brown thorn tree breaks in two high over Common Strand under a bitter black wind that blows from the left hand. Our courage breaks like an old tree. And it goes on, but that was very much the west of Ireland, whereas our landscape was gentler. The other thing we had were the ballads, because we had a huge rebellion in 1798,
yes,
which ended in our town. The town was burned, and the rebels' last stand was on the hill, Vinegar Hill. You know, people would know from Brooklyn. Vinegar Hill is Enniscorthy. It began in Enniscorthy. That's where the rebels ended. And certainly those songs, especially a song called Boule of Vogue, which is written for the 100th anniversary, you know, which I gave the titles of one of my books, The Heather Blazing, and Boule of Vogue is the sunless setting, or the bright May meadow of Shelmalier. A rebel hand set the heather blazing and brought the neighbours from far and near. What happened then was that when I was about 15 or 16, a lot of paperback books came into the house, courtesy of my sister or my mother. And then it's a question of just flicking through things. And I remember, I'm not sure I read personally Jean-Paul Sartre's autobiography called Words, but there was something on the back of it. There was a sentence on the back of it saying, I loathe my childhood. I simply didn't know you could. I knew you could loathe someone in the town who you didn't like. Loathing them would be a sort of necessary part of not liking them. And you could loathe the political party, because my father did, the opposition, but you could loathe your childhood. So I didn't read any of that book, but I read what was written on the back of it. And then I kept going back to look at it to make sure it was true. I loathe my childhood. And I thought it was a terrific idea. So I began to loathe mine. And I remember that I won an essay competition when I was in. It was a really serious Catholic. It was a Catholic boarding school, and so I had a book token, and I could go to Dublin on the train, but I got caught coming back in by a priest and a teacher saying, "What books did you buy?"
Yes.
So I opened the book. I'm not making this up either. It was Kafka's The Trial.
Yes.
It was something by Hemingway, and it was that trilogy by Sartre of novels, which include Iron in the Soul.
Exactly, yeah.
And instead of telling me I should put those books away, or should, they said, "Oh, that sounds really interesting. Maybe when you've read them, you could talk to the class about them." Which was an interesting example. It meant that literacy mattered so much in Ireland that the fact that you were reading anything, including books that they would have seen as sort of dirty, was fine as long as you were reading it.
Right.
That literacy really matters.
Right. It's interesting. I think we are actually exactly the same age.
We discovered that in Brazil.
We discovered that in Brazil. And in Northfield, Minnesota, I was also reading Sartre because it was cool. I mean, it was like hot,
Yeah.
And but so.